Welcome to Launch Today, the podcast focused on what it takes to get your new business to $1 million in revenue. From marketing tactics to incredible guest interviews, we focus on behind-the-scenes insight from masters in their field. If you want to grow your revenue for your startup or business, you don't want to miss today, because today's guest is a triple threat guest, an operator, an educator, and an investor himself. Today we're privileged to have Pat LaPointe with us. Pat stands at the convergence of angel investing and groundbreaking technology, mentoring and investing in the next wave of tech luminaries out there. As the managing director of Frontier Angels and the CEO of Intrelliance, Pat is reshaping how early-stage companies secure success with a focus on both data and analytics-driven businesses and also how to become a better founder and grow your business with intent. His approach to investment blends strategic insight with an eye for potential, having driven billions in shareholder value through his career. Join us as we delve into Pat's journey of fostering innovation, driving growth, and mentoring the future leaders of the tech world. Pat, welcome to Launch Today.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm so happy to be with you today.
So I've known you for a while. I've actually, we're really a big fan of what you're doing with Intrelliance. I teach at Founder Institute and other startup accelerators, the more kind of traditional accelerator stuff. And you do something different. Talk to me about Intrelliance and why something like this is needed for founders who've been through a traditional accelerator.
Intrelliance really came out of a lot of observation of my own as well as a lot of other investors. We look at hundreds and hundreds of early stage companies, and what we came to realize was that we're 75 or 80 years into this whole venture capital experiment now. The venture model has been around that long, longer obviously, but formalized for about that long. And yet the failure rate of early stage companies is still astounding. It's still 80% on a 5-year horizon. 80% of companies will fail in a 5-year horizon from their startup. And that's, by the way, independent of how much money they raise or the nature of their business or whether the founder had previous success or not. None of those things tend to indicate a lower probability of failure or a higher probability of success. And so as an investor, you can imagine it's pretty frustrating because there's no easy formula. We really started asking ourselves the question, what's missing? What are we not doing better that's causing this high failure rate to persist? And the answer, in a short way, was it's really about human capital. It's about trying to help accelerate the founder's experience curve by injecting human capital more effectively. Because founders, given time and money, can iterate, and many of them will find good answers in the marketplace, right? But most of them fail to find good answers before they run out of time and money. And the only way to really accelerate experience is through mentorship. But as most founders who might be listening to this know, mentorship is a really inconsistent experience for a founder. You get a lot of people with a lot of really good background knowledge experience who don't tend to be very good at conveying that knowledge or experience, either because they have a tendency to just want to tell you what to do or to think that what you're doing is exactly like what they were doing 15 years ago or whatever the case may be. And so at Intrelliance, really what we set out to do was to try to figure out how we could do a better job of bringing this human capital into startup with the same scalability that we've all learned to bring financial capital into startups. And it's tricky. It's a people business, right? So it's messy and it defies process replicability and scalability, but we're giving it a shot. That's essentially what Intrelliance is.
Cool. Yeah, one of the things I've had 4 or 5 businesses I've launched that failed. And the answer for me was rarely money. It was almost always something around the human side, right? We weren't able to scale, or we weren't able to, all the co-founders reach an agreement on some big thing that needed to happen or whatever. And that's not brought up usually in accelerators. They talk about, here's how you make a perfect pitch. Here's how you go secure investment. Here's how you go to market. Those are important things.
Yeah.
But I agree, once you've gotten past that bar, the next big hurdle, which is a heck of a gap to cross, is you've got to go from 4 people to 80, and first-time founder doing that, are you ready for all the people stuff that has to happen?
Yes, it's that. And in the words of the famous scholar and poet Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So founders tend to come out of accelerators with really well-conceived plans. But those plans are based on a large nest of assumptions. And only when they really get their feet wet in the market can they figure out which of those assumptions are realistic or not. And by that point, you're burning, pick a number, $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 a month of your investor capital. So you don't have a lot of time to twiddle around and try and figure out what isn't working and what could we do better. And that's where it's so incredibly important for that human capital injection to be there, because the financial capital injection happened based on the plan. And now if you wind up having to go off script, you got a whole bunch of different issues you have to deal with. And that's where most founders simply don't have the experience. It's not that they're not smart enough to figure it out, Trevor. It's that they just don't have the experience to figure it out quickly. And that's what we're trying to help.
Yeah. And one of the things you talked about before in calls with me that weren't recorded is when a VC invests in a business and it fails, the VC is okay. Right? Their whole business model is predicated on a lot of businesses fail. But the founder's life, man, it's so much harder for them because if they got the money, they got the fund, they had the success, and then did not succeed, and you put everything you got into it, it's crushing.
It's devastating. And it's devastating because they often put their life savings into these companies, and because they put 2, 3, 5 years of their life into these companies when these are often their most productive career developing years, and they could have been out doing something else, right? And that makes it devastating not just for the individual founder, but it makes it devastating for their spouse or their partner. It makes it devastating for their children. It makes it devastating for all around them. And that cost is huge. But it even goes beyond that. As you said, investors tend to be fine because of portfolio theory. As an investor myself, I know not to put too many eggs in one basket, but to spread them out over many different companies because I have so little control over the outcomes. But what also really hurts is the communities that these founders operate in. When companies fail, the millions of dollars that got invested in those companies returns zero leverage to the community. The jobs that got created go away. But probably even more importantly, the leaders that might have developed, the philanthropists that might have come out of a successful venture, that would have reinvested their skills, their time, their energy, their connections, and their money back into the community, poof, it's gone. And when 80% of them are failing, the amount of leverage that the community is getting out of all the money that went into those companies adds up to very little. There's a huge opportunity cost there, and I don't know if anybody actually ever counts it, but you do some simple math and it becomes pretty obvious that we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year in the cost to the communities.
I get that. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. But it really is. It ends up being a boat anchor there as well. And given things like it is super hard for women and minorities to get investment, and then the failure rate for them, of course, is just the same as it is for anybody else, to then see all that investment depart their communities as well, that's also brutal.
Oh, about communities worldwide.
Yeah, but yes. Mentoring is one of the ways out here, right? And as somebody who's been mentoring for Founders Institute for 8 years now and has been mentoring startups for 15 years, yeah, I definitely think it is important when you don't have to be the be-all, end-all master in your field. You just have to be ahead of somebody who you're helping out. But what is your philosophy on mentoring to help early-stage companies and founders navigate those early challenges of growth?
I'll have to say that my philosophy on mentoring has matured over decades, or at least I hope it's matured over decades. And I think back to the mentors that I had when I was coming up and the mentors that I had when I was building 3 successful software companies. And I think about all the mentors that I see who are engaged in accelerator programs and local community efforts and things of that nature. And there is so much goodwill there on behalf of the mentors, so much willingness to pay it forward. There's also so much commercial experience. There's so much experience of people who've navigated tricky leadership situations, of people who've successfully dealt with complex market structures, partnerships, channels, routes to market, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, so little of it winds up getting effectively transferred to founders. And it's a really interesting dynamic that we've learned. Founders have a tendency to think that what they're looking for is the smartest mentor who's got the right answers. And that's the completely wrong way to think about it. And so you ask about what's the core of what I've come to believe to know about effective mentorship. And it's really biological. The vast majority of innovation that happens in all aspects of humanity is what's called recombinant innovation. And recombinant innovation is not creating something new on a white piece of paper. It's putting chocolate and peanut butter together. That's recombinant innovation, right? Think of now my mobile phone. Think of all of the things that are in here that used to be independent concepts: phone, camera, email, etc., right? All in one device now, right? And so the most common by far form of innovation is recombinant. And recombinant innovation means multiple people coming together and contributing something, and one or more of them recognizing that, hey, wait a minute, there's an idea here. If we take this concept and twist it this way because we did it in this other area, we have something great. Recombinant innovation comes from a certain part of the brain. It comes from a certain neural area of the brain that is much more lit up by puzzles and games and other sort of creative intelligence than it is analytical intelligence. Analytical intelligence is about solving math problems. It's about figuring out linear solutions, etc., right? Innovation, particularly recombinant, comes from that other side of the brain. Now, when you think about what it takes to activate that more innovation-oriented side of the brain, that side of the brain is lit up by questions, not by smart answers. And so what the founder should be looking for are mentors who ask smart questions, not mentors who have smart answers. And that's a big difference between how the vast majority of mentorship is practiced in the world today and how we'd like to see it practiced. And yet it's a very difficult thing for an individual to do, particularly an individual who's maybe 30 years into their career and very successful and very confident in their knowledge and the value that they can offer. Those people often also sit down with a founder in a coffee shop and they think that the best thing they can do in a 20-minute coffee meeting is to give them the answers that they need so they can go faster. That's not it. It's how do I help spur the recombinant innovation opportunities here? That's the role of the mentor that we're trying to help teach to millions and millions of these mentors who, by the way, don't often see the need to learn how to be a more effective mentor.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I would definitely agree. I am guilty of being the mentor who answers a question more often than I am the mentor who asks a good question. And that's such an interesting lesson to impart.
This
now
way,
I'm going to have to think about how I approach.
Think about all the founders that you interact with. Think about, there are some who are very highly experienced. There are more who have strong areas of competency, but big gaps from an experience perspective, right? Um, when
Yeah.
you really step back and look at the profile of the people you're helping, ask yourself one question. What's the likelihood that the question they're asking you is actually the right question?
True.
And if you think about the probability that they may not even be asking you the right question, then you start to realize that chasing that rabbit down the hole and giving them the best answer to the wrong question isn't really going to help.
So yeah, I do very much. I tend to reframe, like someone will say inevitably, "Hey, if I just had more leads, my business would work," and then the answer is almost always no, right? The
Yeah.
problem isn't you don't have enough people seeing your page. There's not enough people want what you're selling, and why is that? So I do reframe up, but it is way better. Kaizen, the five whys, right? Get somebody into the real root of the problem and teach them the process of discovering it rather than teach them, hey, if I talk to Trevor, he's smart. And then I just have to keep talking to Trevor or some other mentor.
That's right.
Teaching them how to fish is a way better thing than to give them the fish.
And there's so much ego involved too. There's side. I want to look smart. I want to seem competent because hey,
Yeah,
this mentor might be an investor or they might know people who are investors. So I always want to project
sure.
confidence and competence, right? When the paradox is actually what drives breakthrough growth. And the paradox is vulnerability. It's being able to say, I have no idea what I'm doing, or I'm really anxious about this aspect of the business because I just don't feel like I've got a solution, or I'm really grappling to get my arms around something, or even I'm having a hard time working with my co-founder. We're just not, those are exactly the kinds of things that founders need help with, that experienced business people have lived through. Even if they're not necessarily deep experience in your industry sector, they may have been great leaders of organizations that went through similar struggles. And as a founder, I strongly encourage other founders to get over their ego concern and learn to be vulnerable with every potential mentor, because it's the only way to really tell what that mentor might be able to teach you.
Interesting. So you talk about the importance of mentorship from the founder's point of view. I do also feel like teaching a mentor how to be a better mentor, like you were just discussing, right? How do you learn how to ask the right question? Unless your mentors are retired, and a lot of them are, but a whole lot of them aren't. There's also just direct benefits for the mentor in improving this skill as a leader, because most mentors tend to be leaders. You mentioned there's ego involved too. How do you encourage, because you've got this huge network of mentors, how do you encourage mentors to want to be better at mentoring and improve that skill? What makes someone go, oh, yeah, you're right, I could be better at this?
Yeah, I can't, is the honest answer. Because you asked me how I encourage them to want to be better. And the answer is I can't. I cannot give them the motivation to be better. What I can do is I can help them tap into a latent motivation that may lie within them. I can help them, for example, if I ask, think about the last mentoring interaction you had. What percentage of the time did you spend talking? If the answer is more than 30%, maybe you're not approaching this right.
It was.
Right? So now, if that flicks an emotional chord for you as a mentor, now I can help you.
Yeah.
I can help you become better. I can help you because provide some really tangible behavioral skill training that a lot of these people who have been leaders and managers have been taught, but they simply don't practice them as deliberately as perhaps would be ideal. One of those skills, for example, is active listening. So we try to teach mentors how to be better active listeners, how to ask clarifying questions, to ask expanding questions, to poke and probe at their understanding of what the founder's actually saying, rather than just presuming that they heard it right. We teach mentors about what we call analysis versus advocacy. Advocacy is, okay, I've listened to you for 5 minutes. I've run it through my pattern recognition in my brain, and I think I've seen this movie before. Here's what you should do. That's advocacy. Analysis is, okay, so if I understand the problem correctly, what are the limits? What are the extremes of what you might do here? What's the most extreme solution you might take if you did a hard left turn versus the most extreme solution if you did a hard right turn? See what I'm doing? Is I'm trying to sort of expand and change the analysis framework rather than dive on the hand grenade that you threw on the table, right? And so we teach that. We also teach mentors vulnerability themselves because, look, let's face it, there's a lot of ego involved in being a mentor. You want to project that you're this incredibly competent, experienced person who's been so successful, maybe because you want a big options package, or maybe because you're trying to earn whatever fee you're getting as being an advisor, or maybe just because you like being in a position where young people look at you like a hero. And that's all very human and very natural. And I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with it. I'm simply suggesting that it's not a great posture to be an effective mentor. To be an effective mentor, you have to be able to look at the founder and say, oh man, I can't tell you how many times I effed up something like this. I can't tell you how weak I am at the same thing you've progressed weakness in. But the good news is that I know people who are strong in it, and I can introduce you to some of those people, right? Rather than trying to position myself as the be-all and end-all. And then we take all of that, the active listening, the analysis versus advocacy, the vulnerability, and we give our mentors the opportunity to practice those skills in little sidebar one-on-one meetings. And we watch and we observe and we give them feedback. Because any other skill that you need to learn, you have to practice it and fail at it in order to develop the synapses that help you understand when you're doing it properly. And there's one other thing that we do that I think is a little different, and that is we encourage mentors to work together in teams rather than to just do one-on-one with founders. And that goes back to the recombinant innovation. So Trevor may see a situation in a certain way through the lens of his life experience. Pat may see the same situation through a different lens of life experience. When Trevor and Pat are talking to the founder at the same time, they're not just communicating their life experience to the founder, they're hearing one another's life experience. And often that creates a recognition of a spark of possibility that neither the person who spoke nor the founder would have found, right? So it's the wisdom of crowds. I hesitate to use that because it's a bit over term.
It's code pairing, but in the mentorship space.
Exactly. You said code pairing?
Code pairing, yeah. When you have two developers try to solve a problem together.
Good.
The way they are.
I'll give you another term.
Their approaches.
I'll give you another term for it that sounds very similar. Co-parenting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Those of us who've been fortunate enough to grow up with both a father and a mother lived through exactly this, parenting in teams, right? And they didn't always agree with one another about what the right thing to do was. They often gave us conflicting signals. But you know what? It helped us as we developed learn to process conflicting signals and different types of relationships and different information.
Yeah. That's a super enlightening look at mentorship. And I've been doing this for a long time. It is, to me, really exciting to get a chance to learn a bunch about something I've been doing and ask myself some questions about how could you be doing it better? I've got a mentoring call on Friday. I should think about how I'm approaching it.
Yeah.
That's
when
awesome.
you asked, when you teed up that question, you asked me, how do I help mentors learn to ask the right question? And the answer there too is, I don't.
Yeah.
right? I don't try to teach mentors what question to ask because I believe that if I can show you a skill foundation to use, your life experience will guide you to ask good questions. And so I'd say be confident that you'll ask smart questions. Just maybe focus on the specific behavior clues that you're using when you ask them.
I gotcha. So that's all learned people skills on how to be deliberate and intentful as you're mentoring and helping and instructing folks who grow. How has that been part of your professional career, right? You've had 3 exits. You built successful software companies. Frequently, software company and really good people skills don't fit together. So that standout capacity, how has that guided you as you grew and scale businesses?
I think like a lot of other aspects of learning in life, you have to see the evil before you can recognize the good. And I think evil is something that everybody has seen and everybody can easily recognize. I think that, and you don't have to be at the polar extreme of evil for people to be able to recognize it. I think there's a paradox, though, and the paradox is that most people can't recognize good unless it is way out on the polar extreme of good. And the unfortunate reality is that far more people live in the evil zone minute to minute. I'm not saying they're evil people. I'm simply, again, talking about behaviors, right? Far more people live in the unproductive behavior zone minute to minute than they live in the highly effective behavior zone. Very few people I've ever met lived way out on the far end of the positive behavior zone. But I have met enough people in my life who lived to the good side of the middle to learn how, as a human, it's about just wanting to constantly put the best effort out there. And so I've seen a lot of the bad side of mentors. I've seen a lot of people who tell you what you should be doing. We call it shoulding all over the founder, right? I've seen that many, many times. I've seen leaders who create an environment that shuts down discussion, debate, expression of concern. I've also seen leaders who inspire people to confidently speak up, to confidently challenge things. And I've seen the difference in how those organizations work. And what I can tell you is, in no small part, each of the 3 companies that I've been fortunate enough to be part of that moved through to successful exits had more good than evil. There's always evil. The question is, how do you tilt the balance to good? And the answer is, you can't just go out and try to rely on finding someone who lives in the fairy tale land of good. You actually have to get a bunch of people together who have a commitment to just trying to be better at staying on one side of the line versus the other. I know that's a squishy answer. It's the old obscenity thing. How do you know the definition of obscenity? I'll know it when I see it. It's the same thing about effective mentorship versus camouflaged mentorship. And again, my biggest message for your audience is, founders, think about the good and the evil that you've seen, and think about what it is that you're really hoping to get from a mentor relationship. And then apply that criteria to the person you're talking to and see if they seem like they're a good fit for it.
Interesting. I mean, you do a lot, right? You have done a lot. You continue to do a lot. And you're not slowing down. If anything, you're speeding up. You're scaling up Intrelliance. You're tackling more and more. Do you have time for any fun in between Frontier Angels and Intrelliance? What do you do when you're not teaching people to be better people?
Oh, I have lots of fun. First of all, one of the benefits of getting to the point in life where I happen to be is that you know yourself a little bit better, and that makes it actually easier to make good friends. And so I have a really good circle of friends in my life that really enrich my life tremendously. Second, I'm very active in a lot of outdoor activity. I live in the mountains of Montana, and I can literally walk out my door and get on a trail and hike 100 miles without seeing a human being. And so we are out on the trails very frequently, whether it's when there's 8 feet of snow on the trails or whether it's the middle of the summer. We also have a bunch of rivers, which lends itself to a lot of kayaking and a lot of fishing, which is a lot of fun, a lot of outdoor camping activity. And I'm also a woodworker. I actually like building furniture, and I have a nice wood shop down in my basement. And I find nothing more relaxing after a long week of business puzzles than going down into that shop and dealing with the puzzles of physics and nature, wood fibers and tools and metal spinning at certain rates, and trying to figure out all of that puzzle. So that's how I spend a lot of my free time.
You still have all 10 fingers too, right?
And I still have all 10 fingers.
All 10
I'm
fingers?
always reluctant to make that statement because I know it could change in a heartbeat. But but then again, I could also be out hiking and encounter a mountain lion.
That's true. A bear could eat you. Yes, that's true. I just recently got a 1940s a gigantic radial arm saw, a huge, it weighs 700 pounds.
Yeah.
And it was before they invented safety. So it was just like the blade on a spinning arbor. And I'm like, I'm going to use it for rip cuts, but also I'm going to be very get those sleeves up. I don't want to have an arm cut off. Let's go.
There's a reason that they don't make new ones anymore.
But for the laser straight precision on a 36-inch throw on this thing's giant, ridiculous arm, I'm like, I'll learn how to be a careful woodworker to know I'm making a precisely straight line when I cut with that thing.
Isn't it kind of, isn't there a parallel here in terms of how we talk about founders too? We talk about the fact that you can't make anything great without taking some substantial risk. But not unlike woodworking, before you or I will put a piece of wood into a machine with a rapidly spinning blade, we'll think 3 or 4 times. We won't just measure twice. We'll think 3 or 4 times about what could go wrong here and how could I get hurt, right? And then we'll adjust major things or minor things. We'll adjust the way we stand, the way we position our weight, how quickly we try to feed something through, how many aids we use, how many jig components we use to try to control for movement and things, right? And I think it's very similar in the founder experience. You have to take those kinds of risks, but often you don't know what you don't know. And a large part of what you don't know is the risk factors, what could go wrong. And boy, that brings us right back around to mentorship, right? Because I didn't learn woodworking just by doing it. I learned by watching other people do it too.
Yeah. My son, as he grows up, I trust him on a bandsaw. The potential to hurt yourself on a bandsaw is pretty minimal, right? So he's gone and built planes and stuff just with wood while I'm working on a different machine in the workshop. That's fine, right? We taught him safe practices, and he grew up getting that from me. Right. And someday, maybe he'll never use it when he moves out. I don't know. But he's got that skill, and if it ever comes to mind, he could use it.
Right, exactly. And someday he's going to want to say, gee, I built an airplane, so it wouldn't be terribly hard for me to build, I don't know, some complex geometric thing, multidimensional geometric thing, right? And that's going to involve using that very same bandsaw in different ways, which is going to change the risk profile from what he's been familiar with, right?
That's true. Yeah. Cool. So let me also ask you, I always like to ask every guest, what's a book you've read recently that you found worthy of recommendation? Doesn't have to be a business book, just something you've read that you're like, other people should check this out.
There are a few, and I'm looking at my phone and my bookstore library because I've always got at least one book going. One business book that I read recently that I really enjoyed was The Coming Wave. And it's basically about where are we as a society at the intersection of AI and genetics. Where are we where technology and biology start to really fuse and become the same thing. And that was a really interesting and had a lot of eye-opening ideas for us. I also read, I recently read a complete biography of Napoleon, which was torturous. It was like 2,400 pages.
And huge.
It's huge. Yes. But boy, did I learn a lot about European history that I'd only had bits and pieces of before, and I didn't really understand a lot of the social context around what was happening at the time. This war started here and these parties fought and this many people died, but I didn't really understand the social context or the political context. And what was probably even more fascinating was the economic context for why these wars were starting in the first place. And we have a tendency to think that wars start because somebody slapped somebody else or somebody insulted somebody else, but really, it's usually about trade, right? It's usually about some commodity or some shipping route or something that is integral to one party's economy becomes threatened by other parties. And that's generally why it starts.
Yeah, I recently, a couple years ago now, read Quicksilver by Neil Stephenson, and it has like a 2-chapter digression on King Edward's debasement of the British currency. He basically diluted gold coins to be able to mint more of them.
Yeah.
And then people wouldn't take gold coins made after a certain date because they knew they weren't really gold.
Yeah.
This kind of thing ends up, you don't think about it, but it was a big part of the economy back then.
Totally, right? And even when you think back to the founding of the United States and the number of currencies that were in play in the 13 colonies, there were, at any given point in time, there were dozens of currencies floating around, right? And that was when the idea of money was a very localized or even tribalized concept. It wasn't the big denominator of trust that we have today.
And one of the elements that shifted, because back in the colonies days, right after the United States became a country, people would say the United States are. It was a plural entity.
Yeah.
And as we united around a stronger federal government and a stronger Federal Reserve currency, it became the United States is. It became a singular entity then. So how you thought about it changed.
And I wonder if that changed first within or from the outside. I don't really know.
I don't either. I'm sure some historian somewhere would be able to raise their hand and say, oh, call on me. But not an interactive show, sadly. All right, Pat, this has been super enlightening. I hope any founder who's listening pays attention to what this means for you as you're looking to grow and find mentors yourself. I hope any founder who is themselves looking to become a mentor thinks about some of the things that Pat has talked about today. Let me ask you, do you have a final thought you'd like to use to wrap the show up with a bow?
I think it's that bringing human capital into your company as a founder, CEO, is a very deliberate act. And it requires thoughtfulness about what the company needs and what you need as a CEO, where your gaps are and what you need to fill those gaps. And there are a lot of tools you can use to fill those gaps. Some of it comes from your board of directors, some of it maybe from your advisory board, some of it from independent mentors. I encourage you to think about first diagnosing what you really need and then fully exploring the solutions that might help you get it.
Excellent. If people want to know more about you or about Intrelliance, where do they go?
You can get me on either Intrelliance.org, that's ENTRELIANCE.org, or you can reach me at any time at frontierangels.com. Just drop me a note.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being on the show, Pat. Be sure, if you like this episode, subscribe to the show. We're releasing new stuff every week to help you and your business grow to $1 million. Thanks so much, Pat.